The funeral director's voice was gentle, too gentle, when she said my parents wouldn't be coming. I was standing in the hallway outside the visitation room, my phone still warm against my ear. My mother had called. Not to say they were running late, not to ask what time they needed to be there, just to tell me they weren't coming. For days after my husband died, 2 hours before the viewing. Your father thinks it's pointless, she said. He's already gone. Being there won't change anything. I remember the exact texture of the wall behind me because I pressed my palm against it. Cool drywall. The kind that's been painted over too many times, slightly bumpy. My other hand was shaking. I couldn't steady it. He was your son-in-law, I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from someone else's mouth. We know who he was. That was the worst part. Not that they didn't understand. It was that they understood perfectly and decided it didn't matter. That my grief, my need to see them stand beside me while I watched people file past the man I'd chosen to spend my life with, wasn't worth their time. I hung up without saying goodbye. What I didn't know then was that this moment, this impossibly cruel, casual dismissal, wasn't the beginning of a problem. It was the moment I finally saw the whole shape of it. My parents weren't bad people. That's what I've had to sit with for 2 years now. They weren't abusive or deliberately cruel. They were just selectively absent, strategically uninvested. And I didn't realize it until I married someone they decided wasn't worth their effort. I grew up in a quiet house in the suburbs. My father was an accountant. My mother organized charity events. They were respectable, stable, the kind of people who Christmas card their entire address book. They showed up for things that mattered to them. My father's company golf tournaments, my mother's book club functions, the annual neighborhood block party where they could network. When I was 12, I made the soccer team. The competitive one, the tier above recreational. I was so excited I couldn't sleep the night before my first game. I told my parents about it at dinner. My mother said, "That's nice," and asked my brother about his debate team meeting. My brother was 16. He was good at debate, so it was interesting to her. My brother got driven to every tournament. She packed him snacks. She wore his team colors. I played soccer for 5 years. My parents came to exactly 3 games. One was senior night, where they basically had to come. One was when my father's boss happened to be free. One was because a co-worker of my mother's happened to mention she'd watched me play the week before. And I think my mother felt embarrassed that she hadn't. I was a good player. Not a prodigy, but solid. Reliable. I scored 23 goals my senior year. But the games they missed? The tournaments where I played the best? Those didn't happen in their world, so they didn't count. Looking back, I can see the pattern now with such clarity it hurts. They didn't lack love. They lacked interest in anything that existed outside their carefully managed sphere. And when I started dating Marcus, he was immediately filed into that category. Marcus was a musician. A struggling musician, to use my father's phrasing whenever he introduced him to people. Marcus was a school music teacher who played gigs at coffee shops on weekends. He didn't make much money. He didn't work in finance or tech or law. He existed in a field my parents didn't understand and therefore couldn't be proud of. They tolerated him at holidays. My mother would ask stilted questions about his job. Questions designed to highlight how temporary or unstable it was. Oh, still teaching the same school? No better opportunities yet. My father would disappear into the living room, literally leave the conversation, and watch golf. But I loved him. God, I loved him. He was bright and funny and he cried during movies and he played guitar for kids who couldn't afford lessons. When he looked at me, I felt seen. Not sized up, not measured against some invisible standard. Seen. We got married in a small ceremony. My parents attended. My mother wore a dress that she kept saying was nice enough for a wedding that wasn't too fancy anyway. I remember my father checking his watch during the vows. That was 9 years before the funeral. 9 years of them never quite accepting him. Never quite including him. never quite admitting that maybe their daughter had made a choice they couldn't control. The patterns don't announce themselves. They accumulate. Like dust on a shelf you stop noticing. You just live inside them until one day, something forces you to look. The aneurysm happened on a Tuesday. Marcus was teaching a 9th grade trumpet section. He stopped mid-sentence and put his hand to his head, and one of his students said he looked confused. Then he fell. Just fell, right there in front of 30 teenagers. The hospital called me. I was at work. I remember standing in the parking lot outside my office building, the sun too bright, unable to make sense of the words the doctor was saying. Brain bleed. Surgery. Come immediately. I drove like I was outside my own body. 2 hours. The longest 2 hours. He was alive when I got there, but barely. The surgery had helped, but they weren't sure about damage. They weren't sure about anything except that he'd had a massive stroke, and we needed to wait and see. I called my parents from the waiting room at 4 p.m. I told them Marcus was in surgery. I told them he might not survive the night. I told them I needed them. My mother said, "Oh no. That's terrible. Do they know what caused it?" They don't know yet. I don't know what to do. Well, there's not much you can do right now, is there? The doctors will handle it. That was the whole conversation. They didn't offer to drive up. Didn't ask what I needed. Didn't say they'd pray for him or be thinking of me. They just absorbed the information and moved on. Marcus survived. But he was different. The stroke had affected his motor skills, his speech. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital, then 2 months in recovery. He couldn't teach. Couldn't play guitar. The hand on his left side didn't work right. The words sometimes got stuck. During that time, my parents visited once. They stayed for 40 minutes. My father brought a plant that Marcus was allergic to. My mother spent the visit telling me about her book club drama. When they left, she patted Marcus's shoulder and said, "I'm sure you'll be back to normal soon." But we both knew he wouldn't. And we both knew they didn't actually care about that complexity. They wanted a version of events where the problem resolved quickly and efficiently, so they could stop thinking about it. What I didn't know then, what changed everything, was the email I found 6 months later. Marcus was doing better. Still recovering, but better. We'd adjusted to the new normal. He wasn't teaching full-time anymore. He'd taken a position as an assistant director at a music school, something less demanding. He could work from home some days. We were making it work. I was cleaning out emails, years of clutter, when I found an old thread between my father and one of his friends. They'd been forwarded to my father's work email and he'd saved them. The friend was asking for my address, saying he wanted to send a get well card. My father's response: "Thanks, but honestly, I wouldn't bother. It's not clear if he'll recover well, and it might be awkward if he doesn't. Plus they're going through some financial strain now, so I'm not sure a card would be appropriate." A get well card was inappropriate. He'd decided, from the safety of his email account, that my husband's recovery wasn't worth acknowledging. That his friend's gesture of kindness might be awkward if Marcus didn't become normal again. That our struggle with money, because yes, one income after we'd been living on two, with medical bills, was something to be embarrassed about. I printed that email. I read it 4 times. Each time, something inside me crystallized a little more. I didn't confront him then. I wasn't ready. I just kept it. Kept the proof. Because I knew something was going to break, and I wanted to remember why. Marcus died 14 months later. A second, massive stroke. This one the doctors said he couldn't have survived. He was 43 years old. There's a whole period after that I only remember in fragments. The decisions about the funeral home, the obituary, choosing a casket. These were tasks that required moving my body and making my mouth form words. I did them the way you'd follow instructions for building something from IKEA, methodical, numb. I called my parents the day after Marcus died. I needed to tell them, and also I needed help. I needed them to be the people who show up in moments like this. The people who drive to their daughter's house and sit in the kitchen and help her figure out how to exist in a world that suddenly doesn't contain her husband. My father answered. His mother called, he said. We heard. I'm very sorry. Are you coming to the funeral? A pause. A real audible pause. When is it? I told him. Saturday, 4 days away. We'll see what we have going on, he said. Your mother might have a commitment with her garden club. The garden club. In the middle of my sentence explaining that my husband of 9 years was dead, he put our availability in question because my mother had committed to gardening. Something happened in my chest. A shift. Like a bone slipping back into place. Let me be very clear, I said. My voice was steady. Scary steady. My husband died. His funeral is Saturday. You will be there, or you will not be my parents anymore. That's not fair, he said immediately. You're in shock. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my entire life. The silence this time was different. This was the silence of someone realizing they'd been called on something, and they didn't have a way to minimize it. We'll be there, he finally said. But they weren't. Not really. My mother sent a text at 8 a.m. on Saturday. Your father's back is acting up. We're so sorry. We can't make the drive. A text. While I was getting dressed. While Marcus's mother was in my living room, unable to stop crying. While I was about to go stand in front of 200 people and explain what it meant to lose the person who made me want to be alive. I didn't call them back. I didn't respond. I drove to the funeral alone. Well, with Marcus's family, but alone in the way that mattered. That night, after everyone had gone home, after I'd been hugged by strangers and thanked for the service and told how wonderful Marcus had been, wonderful, past tense finished done, I sat at my kitchen table, and I wrote them a letter. Not an email. A letter printed, signed, mailed. It said, You've taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. Presence is a choice. You choose it or you don't. For years you chose not to choose me, not really. You chose your comfort, your schedules, your idea of what mattered. You looked at the man I loved and decided he wasn't worth your time. You looked at my grief and decided your convenience was more important. I need you to understand what you've chosen. You've chosen to not be my parents. Not because I'm punishing you, but because you've shown me what that role means to you. And I cannot have people in my life who show up with that kind of indifference. You will not hear from me again. I'm not angry. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest about what I need, and what you've proven you cannot give. I wish you well. I sent it on a Tuesday, exactly a week after Marcus died. My mother called 3 times that week. My father didn't call at all. There was a letter from my mother saying they were devastated, that I was cutting them out. She wanted to talk about this rationally. But there was nothing to talk about. The decision hadn't been made in a moment of grief. It had been made over 9 years of moments that all pointed to the same truth. My parents loved me only when it was convenient for them. And I deserved better than that. Especially now. Especially now that I understood how quickly everything could disappear. 2 years have passed. Some days it feels like 2 weeks. Some days it feels like 2 decades. People ask if I regret it. If cutting off my parents was worth it. The question assumes there was an alternative. That I could have kept them in my life while also being okay. But okay isn't binary. You're either healing, or you're reopening the wound every time you see them. There's no middle ground with people who've shown you they won't meet you there. The first 6 months were the hardest in a completely different way than grief was hard. Grief is expected after losing your spouse. Grief has a shape people understand. Estrangement from parents? That's something people want to solve. They ask, have you tried talking to them? Yes. Maybe they're just scared. Possibly. Could you give them another chance? No. The phone didn't ring much. My brother didn't call to say he thought I was wrong, which surprised me. When I finally saw him at a coffee shop 6 months after Marcus died, he ordered his usual and said, I'm proud of you for doing it. Really? Dad called me asking if I would talk to you, trying to play mediator. I told him no. You don't get to do that to someone and expect immediate forgiveness. I realized my brother had been on the receiving end of the same treatment his entire life. He just had a higher tolerance for it. Or maybe he'd accepted it as the price of family. But he never said I should accept it too. The hardest part wasn't the loss of my parents. It was the loss of the parents I'd hoped they would be. The fantasy of them showing up. The imagining of them comforting me at a funeral. Or helping me sort through Marcus's things. Or simply existing in the background of my healing. But fantasy isn't presence. And I'd learned that lesson too late to apply it to Marcus. What I wasn't expecting was how much lighter I felt. 8 months after the funeral, I realized I'd gone 3 days without thinking about them. 3 whole days. And the realization didn't come with guilt, it came with gratitude. For the space they no longer occupied in my head. For the mental energy I'd spent managing their expectations, interpreting their silences, trying to make myself matter to them more. I sold our house. It had too many rooms that echoed. I moved to a smaller place, one where I could hear myself think. I decorated it with things Marcus and I loved together, but without trying to make it a monument. Just a place to live. I started going to grief support meetings. Not to move on. I hate that phrase. But to be around people who understood that grief isn't something you resolve. It's something you integrate. And most of the people in those meetings had also made hard decisions about who gets to stay in their life. I met someone there. Not romantically, at least not at first. A woman named Claire whose father died when she was young, and whose mother had responded by pretending the grief didn't exist. She treated it like an embarrassment, Claire said. Like I was being dramatic. Claire had a choice to make when she got older. Keep tolerating the invisibility, or name it. She named it. Do you regret it? I asked. Every Christmas, she said. Every Mother's Day. Every time someone asks about my family, and I have to explain. But when I wake up in the morning, I don't feel that weight. You know what I mean? I knew exactly what she meant. A year ago, my mother sent a card. No letter inside, just a card with "thinking of you" printed on the front. No message. Just her signature. I didn't respond. But I also didn't throw it away immediately, which is progress, I guess. It sits in a drawer. A reminder that she exists somewhere, possibly missing me, possibly just going through a social ritual. I'll never know which. And I've made peace with that uncertainty. What I didn't expect was to stop being angry. Anger requires energy. It requires believing that the other person should be different. After about 18 months, I just accepted that my parents are people who couldn't meet their daughter in her darkest moment. And people like that, people who choose comfort over connection, will always be people like that. There's no amount of pain or loss that will teach them differently. That's not a statement of judgment. It's just an observation. Some people's capacity for presence is limited. They don't wake up and decide to be shallow. They're just built that way, and the world happens to them. And they do the best they can with what they have. It just happens that what they have isn't what I need. 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning out one of Marcus's boxes. We still had boxes. 2 years, and I was still slowly sorting through his things. Most of it was gone, donated, sold, thrown away. But there were boxes of documents, things I'd carefully preserved because they felt like evidence that he was here, that he mattered. I found his teaching evaluations. Forms from students, mostly. And there was one, written by a girl named Emma, probably 14 at the time, that said, "Mr. Marcus is the only teacher who ever asked how I was doing on days when I looked sad. He made me feel like he actually cared if I existed." Emma, who probably had her own complicated relationship with attention and presence. Emma, who noticed that Marcus saw her. That's what he did. That's what I loved about him. He had this capacity to make people feel like their existence mattered to him. He didn't check his watch during their conversations. He didn't ask questions designed to subtly diminish them. My parents never learned that skill. Maybe nobody taught them. Maybe they're just not wired for it. But my husband was. And he made me feel that way for 14 years. And when I gave myself permission to step away from people who couldn't do that, I was really just accepting what he'd already shown me. Which is that love isn't just staying. Sometimes love is leaving. If you've ever had to choose yourself over your family, you know what I mean. You know the specific kind of grief that is. The kind that doesn't come with witnesses. The kind people are uncomfortable with. The kind you have to hold alone. But here's what I want you to know quietly, in case you're standing where I stood 2 years ago. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. And the people who would ask you to, who would let you burn just a little, in small ways, forever, are not your people. They never were. Sometimes family is an accident of birth. Sometimes presence is what you choose. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is stop performing a relationship that was never real. The hardest part isn't the goodbye. It's finally understanding that you don't have to earn your own attention.